Crew denied a black woman her first-class seat. 5 minutes later, she ended their careers. Part 1. The Woman Behind the Title. The alarm clock buzzed at 4:30 in the morning, and Dr. Amara Holland reached over to silence it with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned long ago that sleep was a luxury, not a guarantee. She sat up slowly in her modest bedroom, the kind of space that spoke of comfort rather than extravagance. A single photograph sat on her nightstand, her grandmother, dressed in her Sunday best, standing in front of a small Baptist church in rural Georgia. "Morning, Grandma Rose," Amara whispered, as she did every day. It was a ritual that kept her grounded, a reminder of where she came from and why she worked so hard. Amara Holland wasn't the kind of CEO who appeared on magazine covers or gave speeches at elite conferences. She preferred anonymity, operating behind the scenes of Holt Aviation Group, the parent company that owned 3 regional airlines across the country. At 42 years old, she had built her career on one unshakable principle: respect was not negotiable. But lately, something had been eating at her. For 6 months, customer complaints had been flooding the corporate inbox. Passengers reported rude flight attendants, delayed responses, and a growing culture of arrogance among certain crews. The numbers told a story. Satisfaction ratings were plummeting, particularly on flights operated by Skyward Airlines, one of her flagship carriers. Amara had tried the traditional approach. She sent memos. She held training sessions. She even hired consultants to conduct surveys, but nothing changed. The reports kept coming, and the pattern was always the same. Passengers of color, elderly travelers, and anyone who didn't fit a certain mold were treated as inconveniences rather than customers. So Amara made a decision that her executive team would have called reckless if they had known about it. She would fly undercover. No entourage, no corporate badge, no warning. Just a regular passenger with a first-class ticket boarding a flight to see exactly what was happening when no one thought the boss was watching. She dressed simply that morning, a navy blue blouse, dark jeans, and comfortable flats. Her natural hair was pulled back into a low bun, and she wore minimal jewelry. She looked like any other professional woman traveling for work. That was the point. As she drove to the airport, her mind replayed the most recent complaint that had landed on her desk. A young black mother had written about being moved from her paid first-class seat to accommodate a more suitable passenger. The crew had offered no apology, no explanation. They had simply relocated her and moved on as if her dignity meant nothing. Amara's jaw tightened as she remembered reading those words. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. "Baby, you can't fix what you won't face." Today she would face it. The airport was busy when she arrived, filled with the usual chaos of early morning departures. Amara checked in at the kiosk, printed her boarding pass, and made her way through security. She carried only a small leather carry-on bag. Everything about her presence was intentional, unassuming, polite, invisible. When she reached Gate 12, the boarding area was already crowded. Families juggled children and luggage. Business travelers typed furiously on laptops. A flight attendant stood near the gate podium, her uniform crisp and her smile practiced but thin. Amara found a seat near the window and waited, observing quietly. She noticed the way the gate agent greeted passengers, warm and attentive to some, curt and dismissive to others. The pattern was subtle but unmistakable. When the announcement came for first-class boarding, Amara stood and approached the gate. The attendant, a woman in her late 20s with blonde hair pulled into a tight ponytail, barely glanced up. "Economy boards next," she said flatly, her eyes still on her screen. Amara kept her voice calm and kind. "I'm seated in first class." The attendant finally looked up, her gaze sweeping over Amara with a flicker of something cold and dismissive. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "May I see your ticket?" Amara handed over her phone, the boarding pass glowing clearly on the screen. Seat 1A, Dr. Amara Holland. The attendant's smile faltered for just a second, a crack in her mask of professionalism. But pride, or perhaps habit, kept her tone sharp. "Right, proceed." Amara walked down the jetway, her heart steady but her mind recording everything. The test had already begun, and she had a feeling it was about to get much worse. Part 2. The seat that wasn't hers. The aircraft smelled faintly of recycled air and lemon cleaner as Amara stepped through the door. She smiled warmly at the two flight attendants stationed near the entrance, offering a soft, "good morning" as she passed. One attendant, a younger woman with kind eyes, smiled back, "Good morning, welcome aboard." But the other, a tall woman with sharp features and a name tag that read Lena Ford, purser, barely acknowledged her. Instead, she exchanged a quick glance with another crew member near the galley, a glance that carried weight, the kind of silent communication that spoke volumes without a single word. Amara had seen that look before. It was the look of someone who had already made a judgment. She continued down the narrow aisle toward the front of the plane, her carry-on rolling smoothly behind her. First class was nearly empty, just a few passengers settling into their seats. The leather chairs were wide and plush, the kind of comfort that came with a premium ticket price. Seat 1A was on the left side, a window seat with extra legroom. But when Amara reached it, she stopped. Someone was already sitting there. A middle-aged white woman with oversized sunglasses and designer luggage occupied the seat, scrolling through her phone with an air of entitlement. She didn't look up. Amara stood quietly for a moment, then spoke gently, "Excuse me, I believe this is my seat." The woman glanced up, her expression one of mild irritation. "I don't think so. I've been sitting here since I boarded." Amara kept her tone calm and respectful. "I have seat 1A on my boarding pass. Would you mind checking yours?" Before the woman could respond, Lena Ford appeared, her presence swift and commanding. She placed herself between Amara and the seated passenger, her body language protective, as if shielding the other woman from an unwelcome intrusion. "Is there a problem?" Lena asked, her voice cool and clipped. Amara met her gaze evenly. "I'm assigned to seat 1A, but someone else is sitting here." Lena barely glanced at Amara's phone. "This section's full. You must be mistaken." "I'm not mistaken," Amara replied, her voice still calm but firmer now. "My boarding pass clearly shows seat 1A." Lena folded her arms across her chest, a subtle but unmistakable power move. "We'll handle this later. You can take seat 3C until I sort it out." A businessman in seat 2B chuckled under his breath. "Should have booked early," he muttered, loud enough to be heard. Amara felt the weight of every eye in first class turned toward her. Some passengers looked sympathetic. Others simply looked away, uncomfortable witnesses to something they didn't want to acknowledge. From the cockpit, a voice boomed over the intercom. "Flight crew, let's move it along. We've got a schedule to keep." Amara didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice or demand to speak to a manager. She simply nodded, picked up her bag, and walked to seat 3C, a middle seat several rows back. As she settled in, she pulled out her phone and opened a private app, one connected directly to corporate operations. With a few quick taps, she activated the flight's internal recording system and sent a priority alert to her executive team. No one around her noticed, no one knew. But Amara Holland, CEO of Holt Aviation Group, had just documented the first act of discrimination on her own airline, and the clock was already ticking. Within minutes, Lena Ford reappeared, strutting down the aisle with the kind of confidence that came from years of unchecked authority. She stopped at Amara's new seat, her smile thin and cold. "Ma'am," she said, her voice loud enough to draw attention, "security has requested verification of your ticket. It seems the system doesn't list you in first class." Amara looked up slowly, her expression unreadable. "Then check again." Lena's smile didn't waver. I've already checked. Please gather your things. You're delaying the flight. Passengers turned in their seats, phones discreetly angled toward the unfolding scene. Amara could feel the familiar sting of humiliation, the kind that came not from being wrong, but from being dismissed without cause. She stood slowly, her movements deliberate. You're certain about this decision? Lena's confidence was unshakable. Absolutely. Amara stepped into the aisle, allowing the moment to breathe. She looked directly into Lena's eyes, her voice quiet but steady. Then let's make sure it's recorded correctly. Lena blinked, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. But before she could respond, the plane's door, which had just been sealed for departure, suddenly reopened. The captain's voice came through the intercom, confusion evident in his tone. Crew, we're holding at the gate. I repeat, holding at the gate. Lena frowned, turning toward the cockpit. What's going on? No one answered. But Amara knew. The override had been triggered. Corporate operations had received her alert, and now everything was about to change. Part 3, Code Indigo. Captain Thomas Reynolds had been flying commercial jets for 23 years. He'd handled engine failures, severe turbulence, and once even an attempted hijacking. But in all those years, he had never received a Code Indigo alert. He stared at the radio panel, his co-pilot equally confused beside him. Code Indigo, the co-pilot asked. What the hell is that? Reynolds shook his head. I have no idea. The radio crackled to life. Skyward 472, this is ground control. You are ordered to hold position. Do not, I repeat, do not proceed with departure. Reynolds grabbed the handset. Ground control, this is 472. We're sealed and ready for pushback. What's the delay? There was a pause, then a different voice came through, calm, official, and deadly serious. Captain Reynolds, this is corporate operations. You are to hold the aircraft immediately. Do not move. Do not allow any passengers to deplane. Reynolds felt a chill run down his spine. Under whose authority? Another pause, then the answer that made his stomach drop. The owners. Before he could respond, his personal phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. It was his direct supervisor at headquarters, calling on a secure line. He never called during flights. Reynolds answered. This is Reynolds. Captain, listen carefully, the voice said. Dr. Holland is on your flight. Reynolds froze. Dr. Holland, as in Dr. Amara Holland. Yes. She's been conducting an anonymous review. We just received an alert that there's been an incident involving discrimination against her. You need to cooperate fully with the team we're sending. Do you understand? Reynolds's mouth went dry. He glanced back through the cockpit door toward the cabin, his mind racing. Understood. The line went dead. He turned to his co-pilot, his face pale. We've got a problem. In the cabin, passengers were growing restless. The door had been reopened, and now 3 men in dark suits were boarding, followed by 2 airport security officers. Their expressions were grim, professional, and unyielding. Lena Ford, still standing near Amara's seat, watched them approach with growing unease. What's going on? She asked, her voice losing its earlier confidence. One of the executives, a tall black man with graying temples, ignored her. He walked directly to Amara, his expression respectful but urgent. Dr. Holland, he said quietly, we received your alert. We're here to handle this immediately. The cabin went silent. Every passenger, every crew member froze. Lena's face drained of color. Dr. Holland, she stammered. Amara stood slowly, her eyes meeting Lena's with calm, devastating clarity. Yes, the seat you denied belongs to me, and so does this airline. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Lena's mouth opened, then closed. Her hands trembled slightly. Dr. Holland, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. Amara raised a hand, cutting her off. No, you had every chance to choose respect over pride. You chose poorly. She turned to the executive. "Where's Captain Reynolds?" "In the cockpit, ma'am." Amara walked toward the front of the plane, her steps measured and deliberate. The executive followed, and so did Lena, her confidence now completely shattered. When they reached the cockpit door, Amara knocked once. It opened immediately. Captain Reynolds stood, his face a mixture of regret and fear. "Dr. Holland, You heard the exchange," Amara said, her voice quiet but firm. "You heard your purser treat a passenger with disrespect. You did nothing." Reynolds lowered his gaze. "Ma'am, I didn't realize." "That's the problem, Captain. You didn't realize because you didn't care to notice. And that failure, that willful blindness, has consequences." She turned to the executive. "Relieve this crew of duty, effective immediately." Gasps rippled through the cabin. Phones came out. A woman in the back whispered, "Is this really happening?" Lena stepped forward, her voice breaking. "Please, Dr. Holland, I have a family. I've worked for this airline for 7 years. I made a mistake, but—" Amara turned to face her fully. "You didn't make a mistake, Miss Ford. You made a choice. You chose to see a black woman standing in front of you and assume she didn't belong. You chose to humiliate her publicly rather than check your own bias. And you chose to escalate the situation even when given multiple opportunities to correct it." Lena's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Amara's expression softened, but her resolve didn't waver. "I believe you are, but apologies don't undo harm. They only acknowledge it. You'll have to live with this moment, Miss Ford, and I hope you learn from it." She nodded to the security officers. "Please escort the dismissed personnel from the aircraft." As Lena and 2 other flight attendants were led off the plane, Amara spoke one final time, her voice carrying through the cabin. "Remember this moment. You didn't lose your jobs because of me. You lost them because you couldn't recognize respect when it was standing in front of you." The door closed behind them. The cabin remained silent, the weight of what had just happened settling over everyone like a heavy blanket. Captain Reynolds stood frozen, his career hanging by a thread. "Dr. Holland, You're grounded, Captain," Amara said. "Corporate will contact you regarding next steps." She walked back to the main cabin where passengers sat in stunned silence. The executive approached her. "We have a replacement crew standing by. They'll be here in 15 minutes. Amara nodded. "Good. Let's get these passengers where they need to go." Part 4, The Reckoning. 15 minutes felt like an eternity. Passengers sat in their seats, some scrolling through their phones, others whispering to their neighbors. The energy in the cabin had shifted from confusion to something else, a mixture of awe, discomfort, and disbelief. Amara returned to seat 3C, the middle seat she'd been relegated to, and sat quietly. She didn't move to first class. She didn't make a speech. She simply waited, her hands folded in her lap, her expression calm. A woman across the aisle leaned over hesitantly. "Excuse me, are you really the CEO?" Amara turned to her with a gentle smile. "I am." The woman's eyes widened. "I've never seen anything like that. I'm sorry that happened to you." "Thank you," Amara said softly. "But it doesn't just happen to me. It happens to a lot of people. That's why I'm here." The woman nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You were testing them." "I was giving them a chance to do the right thing," Amara corrected. "They chose differently." A businessman, a few rows up, turned around. "With all due respect, ma'am, don't you think firing them on the spot was a bit extreme? Maybe they were just having a bad day." Amara met his gaze evenly. "Sir, dignity isn't something that should depend on whether someone's having a good day, and disrespect isn't a minor inconvenience. For many passengers, moments like this don't just hurt, they define their entire experience. My job is to ensure that never becomes acceptable." The man opened his mouth, then closed it, his argument dissolving under the weight of her words. Another passenger, an elderly black man near the back, spoke up, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for standing up, for all of us." Amara's eyes glistened, but she kept her composure. "You never have to thank me for doing what's right." The cabin door opened again, and a new crew entered, 4 flight attendants and a different captain. They moved efficiently, professionally, their demeanor noticeably different from the previous crew. The new purser, a Latina woman in her 40s, approached Amara directly. "Dr. Holland," she said respectfully, "we've been briefed on the situation. On behalf of this crew, I want to personally apologize for what you experienced. It will not happen again on this flight." Amara stood and shook her hand. "Thank you. Let's get everyone home safely." The new purser smiled. "Absolutely. And ma'am, your seat in first class is ready for you." Amara glanced at seat 3C, then back at the purser. "Actually, I think I'll stay right here. It's important for me to sit where I was told I belonged." The purser nodded, understanding the quiet power of that choice. "Of course, ma'am." As the new crew prepared for departure, the atmosphere began to shift. Passengers who had been silent started to relax. A few even smiled. One woman pulled out her phone and began typing furiously. The businessman who had questioned Amara earlier stood and walked over to her seat. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology. I spoke without thinking." Amara looked up at him kindly. "We all have blind spots, sir. The important thing is being willing to see them when they're pointed out." He nodded, humbled, and returned to his seat. The plane finally pushed back from the gate, 35 minutes behind schedule. As they taxied toward the runway, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Morris. I apologize for the delay this morning. I want you to know that this crew is committed to providing every single passenger with the respect and service they deserve. Thank you for your patience, and we'll have you in Chicago in just under 3 hours." The passengers applauded, not the polite, obligatory applause that sometimes followed landing announcements, but genuine, heartfelt appreciation. As the plane lifted into the sky, Amara gazed out the window, watching the ground fall away beneath them. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind again. "Baby, sometimes you have to shake the tree to see what falls out." The tree had been shaken, and what had fallen out was uglier than she'd hoped, but exactly what she'd suspected. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her executive assistant. "News crews are already at O'Hare. The story leaked. They're calling it the 5-minute firing. What do you want me to do?" Amara typed back, "Schedule a press conference for this afternoon. It's time we talked about what respect really means." She put her phone away and closed her eyes, not to rest, but to prepare. The hardest part wasn't firing people who had failed. The hardest part was making sure the lesson stuck, that this moment became a turning point rather than just a headline. A flight attendant approached with a bottle of water. "Can I get you anything else, Dr. Holland?" Amara smiled. "No, thank you, this is perfect." As the attendant walked away, Amara allowed herself a small moment of reflection. She hadn't wanted to embarrass anyone. She hadn't wanted to ruin careers. But she had built her company on a foundation of respect, and she would not allow that foundation to crumble because people thought no one was watching. Her grandmother had taught her that power wasn't about control, it was about responsibility. And today, she had exercised that responsibility in the most visible way possible. The flight continued smoothly. Passengers read, slept, worked on laptops. But every so often, someone would glance toward seat 3C, where the CEO of the airline sat quietly in a middle seat, a living reminder that titles meant nothing if they weren't backed by character. Part 5. The news breaks. By the time the plane touched down at Chicago O'Hare International Airport, the story had already spread like wildfire across social media. Videos recorded by passengers had been uploaded, shared, and reshared thousands of times. Hashtags like Respectin' the Skis and CEO Justice were trending nationwide. News outlets from local stations to national networks were scrambling to cover the story. CEO fires entire flight crew mid-flight after discrimination. One headline read. Black woman denied first-class seat turns out to be airline owner, declared another. The narrative was spreading faster than Amara could have anticipated, and with it came both praise and criticism. Some people called her a hero. Others accused her of being heavy-handed, of destroying lives over a single mistake. But Amara had expected this. She'd been in business long enough to know that accountability always made people uncomfortable, especially when it was swift and public. As the plane taxied to the gate, the new captain made an announcement. Dr. Holland, if you could please remain seated for just a moment after we arrive. We have security standing by to escort you through the terminal. Amara nodded, though she would have preferred to walk through like any other passenger. But she understood the necessity. The moment she stepped off that plane, she would no longer be just a CEO, she would be a symbol. The passengers deplaned slowly, many of them pausing to thank her as they passed. An elderly woman squeezed her hand. A young black girl, no more than 10 years old, looked up at her with wide eyes and said, "You're really brave." Amara knelt down to meet her gaze. "So are you, sweetheart. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you don't belong somewhere you have every right to be." The girl's mother, tears in her eyes, mouthed a silent thank you. When the cabin was finally empty, 2 airport security officers entered, along with the executive who had boarded earlier. "Dr. Holland, we have a private exit arranged. The press is waiting at the main terminal." Amara stood, straightening her blouse. "I'm not avoiding the press. Let's go meet them." The executive hesitated. "Ma'am, it might be better to issue a formal statement first. This has gotten big." "Good," Amara said simply. "Then people are paying attention." They escorted her through the jetway and into the terminal, where she was immediately swarmed by reporters. Microphones thrust toward her face. Cameras flashed. Questions overlapped each other in a cacophony of noise. "Dr. Holland, was it appropriate to fire the crew so publicly? Do you think you overreacted? What message are you sending to other airlines?" Amara raised a hand and the crowd quieted slightly. "I'll be holding a formal press conference in 2 hours, but I'll say this now. What happened on that flight was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a culture that has been allowed to fester. My responsibility as CEO is not just to run a profitable airline. It's to ensure that every passenger, regardless of who they are, is treated with dignity and respect. That is non-negotiable." "But did they deserve to be fired?" one reporter pressed. Amara looked directly into the camera. "Ask yourself this. If you were denied a seat you paid for, humiliated in front of dozens of people, and treated as if you didn't belong, would you accept 'I'm sorry' as enough? Or would you expect real consequences?" The reporter fell silent. Amara continued walking, her security team clearing a path through the crowd. As they moved through the terminal, passengers stopped and stared. Some applauded. Others pulled out their phones to record. A few shouted words of encouragement. "You did the right thing. Thank you for standing up." But there were also skeptics. A man in a business suit shook his head. "You just ruined those people's lives over nothing." Amara paused, turning to face him. "It wasn't nothing to me. And I guarantee it wasn't nothing to the dozens of other passengers who have been treated the same way and had no recourse. This is about more than one flight." The man said nothing, but his expression remained unconvinced. Amara didn't need to convince everyone. She just needed to set a standard. By the time she reached the executive conference room that had been set up for her press conference, her team was already assembled. Her chief of operations, her head of public relations, and her legal counsel all stood as she entered. "Dr. Holland, we need to talk strategy," the PR director said urgently. Social media is split. Some people are calling you a hero, but others are saying this was performative, that you staged the whole thing for publicity. Amara set her bag down and poured herself a glass of water. Let them say what they want. The truth is simple. I boarded my own plane, I was treated with disrespect, and I held people accountable. There's nothing performative about that. But the optics are that a CEO actually gave a damn about how her customers are treated, Amara interrupted firmly. And if that makes people uncomfortable, then maybe they need to sit with that discomfort. Her legal counsel cleared his throat. Ma'am, we're anticipating lawsuits. The fired employees have already retained lawyers. Amara nodded calmly. I expected that. Make sure we have every piece of documentation ready, the recordings, the passenger complaints, the disciplinary history of each crew member. This wasn't a rash decision. It was a necessary one. The PR director scrolled through her tablet. We're also getting requests from national news programs. Good Morning America, CNN, NPR, they all want interviews. Schedule them, Amara said. I'm not hiding from this. A knock came at the door and a young assistant peeked in. Dr. Holland, the press is ready for you. Amara took a deep breath, smoothed her blouse and walked toward the door. Before she opened it, she paused and looked back at her team. Remember why we're doing this. It's not about revenge. It's not about making headlines. It's about making sure that what happened to me doesn't keep happening to others. She opened the door and stepped into the bright lights of the press room, ready to face whatever came next. Part 6, the press conference. The conference room was packed. Reporters from every major outlet crowded shoulder to shoulder, cameras positioned at every angle. The flash of photographers created a strobe effect that would have been disorienting if Amara hadn't spent years in the public eye during board meetings and industry conferences. She walked to the podium with her head high, her movements calm and deliberate. She didn't smile. This wasn't a moment for pleasantries, but she also didn't appear angry. Her expression was one of solemn determination. The room quieted as she adjusted the microphone. Good afternoon, she began, her voice steady and clear. My name is Dr. Amara Holland, and I am the CEO of Holt Aviation Group. Earlier today, I boarded one of our flights as an anonymous passenger. What I experienced was unacceptable. I was denied my assigned first-class seat, questioned about the validity of my ticket, and ultimately asked to leave the aircraft. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because someone decided I didn't look like I belonged there. She paused, letting the words settle. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a simple mistake. This was a failure of character, a failure of training, and a failure of leadership. And as the person ultimately responsible for the culture of this airline, I took immediate action. A reporter raised her hand. Dr. Holland, critics are saying that firing the crew publicly was unnecessarily cruel. What's your response? Amara met the reporter's eyes. Cruelty is being humiliated in front of a plane full of people for no reason other than the color of your skin. Cruelty is being told you don't belong in a seat you paid for. What I did was not cruel. It was accountability. And if holding people accountable for discrimination feels harsh, then perhaps we need to reconsider why we're so comfortable allowing discrimination to happen quietly. Another reporter jumped in. But don't you think a suspension or retraining would have been more appropriate than immediate termination? Amara's expression didn't change. This isn't the first time complaints have been filed against members of that crew. This isn't an isolated incident. I've been receiving reports for months, passengers mistreated, dignity violated, and nothing changing despite repeated interventions. At some point, you have to stop giving people chances to do better and start protecting the people they're harming. A third reporter spoke up. There are those who say this was staged, that you set up your employees to fail so you could make a point. Amara's jaw tightened slightly. I didn't set anyone up. I gave them the same opportunity every crew has every single day, to treat a passenger with respect. They failed. If doing my job anonymously to assess the quality of service is setting people up, then we have a much bigger problem than I thought. Dr. Holland, another voice called out, what message are you trying to send to other airlines? Amara leaned forward slightly. The message is simple. Respect is not a customer service tactic. It's a baseline standard. And if your employees can't meet that standard, they shouldn't be working in a service industry. Period. What about the families of the fired employees? Don't they deserve consideration? Amara's expression softened, but her resolve remained firm. Of course they do, and that's precisely why their loved ones should have conducted themselves with integrity. Choices have consequences. I didn't take their jobs. They gave them up the moment they chose disrespect over decency. A hush fell over the room. The questions kept coming, but Amara answered each one with the same calm authority, never defensive, never apologetic. Finally, a young black reporter in the back raised her hand. Dr. Holland, how many times has this happened to you personally? Not just today, but throughout your life. Amara's expression shifted, just slightly. It was the first question that touched the deeper truth beneath the headlines. Too many times to count, she said quietly. I've been followed in stores. I've been asked if I'm lost in professional spaces. I've been assumed to be someone's assistant when I was the one running the meeting. And every single time I had to decide whether to speak up or let it go. Most of the time I let it go because fighting every battle is exhausting. But today I was in a position to do something about it. And I did. The room was silent now, the weight of her words settling over everyone present. This isn't just about me, Amara continued. This is about every passenger who's been treated as less than, every person who's been told, subtly or explicitly, that they don't belong, every individual who's had to swallow their dignity just to get through a flight. I had the power to say enough, and so I did. She stepped back from the podium. That's all I have to say for now, thank you. As she turned to leave, the room erupted, some in applause, others in a flurry of shouted follow-up questions. But Amara didn't look back. She walked out of the conference room with the same steady grace she'd carried throughout the day. Her PR director caught up with her in the hallway. Dr. Holland, that was powerful. Social media is exploding again. I think you just shifted the narrative. Amara shook her head. I didn't shift anything. I just told the truth. People can do with it what they will. Back at her office that evening, Amara sat alone, the city lights of Chicago glowing through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her phone had been buzzing nonstop, messages of support from colleagues, interview requests from journalists, and a few angry emails from people who thought she'd been too harsh. But there was one message that made her pause. It was from the young flight attendant who had smiled at her that morning, the one who had responded warmly when others had not. Dr. Holland, I wanted to say thank you. I've worked for this airline for 3 years and I've seen the way some crew members treat passengers. I've reported it before, but nothing ever changed. Today, you showed us that our voices matter, that speaking up isn't pointless. I'm proud to work for this company now. Amara read the message twice, then set her phone down. This was why it mattered. Not the headlines, not the press conferences, but the people who had been quietly suffering, waiting for someone to notice. She pulled out her grandmother's photograph from her desk drawer and set it in front of her. I hope I made you proud today, Grandma Rose, she whispered. And for the first time that day, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what she'd done, not regret, but exhaustion mixed with a quiet sense of peace. The fight wasn't over. It never really was, but today she'd drawn a line, and that line would hold. Part 7. The Backlash and the Resolve. By the next morning, the backlash had intensified. Lena Ford, the former purser, had appeared on a morning talk show, tearful and apologetic. I made a mistake, she said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. But I don't think I deserve to lose my career over it. Dr. Holland didn't even give me a chance to apologize properly. She just ended everything. The host leaned forward sympathetically. Do you think race played a role in your termination? Lena hesitated, then nodded. I think if I had made the same mistake with a white passenger, I'd still have my job. The clip went viral within hours. Social media lit up with debates. Hashtags like second chances and Lena deserves better began trending alongside respecting the skis. Amara watched the interview from her office, her face expressionless. Her PR director stood nearby, wringing her hands. We need to respond to this. She's turning the narrative around. Amara shook her head. Let her speak. People will believe what they want to believe. But she's painting you as vindictive. She's painting herself as a victim, Amara corrected. And maybe that's easier for people to accept than the truth. Her legal counsel entered the room, holding a tablet. Dr. Holland, 3 of the fired crew members have filed wrongful termination lawsuits. They're claiming racial bias and retaliation. Amara sighed. Do we have the documentation? Everything. Complaint records, disciplinary history, internal reviews. Lena Ford had been written up twice before for unprofessional behavior toward passengers. The captain had been flagged for failing to intervene in customer disputes. This wasn't their first offense. Then we'll present the facts in court, Amara said calmly, and we'll let the facts speak for themselves. Over the next few days, the media storm continued. Some news outlets praised Amara's swift action, calling her a trailblazer for accountability. Others questioned whether the punishment fit the crime, pointing to the crew members' families and livelihoods. An op-ed in a prominent business magazine accused her of performative activism, suggesting that she had orchestrated the entire incident to boost her company's public image. Amara read the piece with a mixture of frustration and resignation. No matter what she did, there would always be skeptics, people who couldn't fathom that a black woman could be both powerful and principled without it being a performance. But then other voices began to rise. Passengers who had been on the flight started sharing their own accounts online. A white businessman posted a video confession. I was on that flight. I laughed when they moved Dr. Holland. I'm ashamed of myself. She didn't overreact, I underreacted. We all did. A mother who had witnessed the incident wrote a long Facebook post detailing how her own daughter, a young black girl, had asked her why the lady was being treated that way. I didn't have a good answer, she wrote. But now I can tell her that sometimes powerful people do the right thing, even when it's hard. Employees within the airline began speaking out too. Flight attendants, gate agents, and ground crew members shared stories of the toxic culture that had been allowed to fester. Anonymous accounts described supervisors who looked the other way when complaints were filed, a hierarchy that rewarded seniority over competence, and a pervasive sense that certain passengers simply didn't matter. The tide began to shift again. Amara received a call from the head of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Dr. Holland, we'd like to honor you at our annual gala. What you did, standing up for dignity in such a public way, it matters. It resonates. Amara was humbled. I appreciate that, but I don't want to be celebrated for doing what should be standard practice. Then let us celebrate the standard you're setting, the woman replied gently. Another call came from a coalition of flight attendants from various airlines, asking if they could meet with her to discuss implementing better training programs industry-wide. Amara agreed to meet with them. This was bigger than one flight, one crew, one airline. This was about changing the culture of an entire industry. Meanwhile, Lena Ford's story was beginning to unravel. Investigative journalists dug into her employment history and uncovered a pattern of complaints that painted a troubling picture. Former passengers came forward with their own stories, being dismissed, belittled, treated as inconveniences. One woman, a Latina teacher from Texas, posted a video recounting how Lena had refused to warm up her baby's bottle during a red-eye flight, telling her coldly, "That's not my job." Another passenger, a black veteran, described being told to move from his assigned seat to make room for a preferred traveler, despite having paid for the upgrade himself. The narrative shifted decisively. Lena wasn't a well-meaning employee who had made one mistake. She was someone who had been allowed to mistreat passengers repeatedly without consequence until she mistreated the wrong person. A follow-up interview was scheduled, and this time, Lena's tone was different. "I've had time to reflect," she said quietly, "and I realize now that what I did was wrong, not just because it cost me my job, but because I hurt someone. I let my assumptions guide my actions, and that's inexcusable." It was a start, not redemption but acknowledgement. Amara didn't watch that interview. She was too busy rebuilding. She held town halls with employees across all three airlines under Holt Aviation Group. She listened to their concerns, their frustrations, their fears. She implemented new training programs focused not just on customer service, but on implicit bias, dignity, and respect. She created an anonymous reporting system so that passengers and employees could flag issues without fear of retaliation. And she had a simple message engraved on every crew badge, every employee ID, every piece of company literature. Respect isn't a service, it's the standard. One evening, as Amara sat in her office reviewing the new policies, her assistant knocked softly on the door. "Dr. Holland, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important." Amara looked up. "Who is it?" The assistant hesitated. "Lena Ford." Amara's expression didn't change, but her heart tightened. "Send her in." A moment later, Lena entered, looking smaller somehow, less certain. She stood near the door, not presuming to come closer. "Dr. Holland," she said quietly, "I know I don't deserve your time, but I wanted to say something to you in person, not through a camera or a lawyer." Amara gestured to a chair. "Sit." Lena sat, her hands folded in her lap. "I was wrong. Not just wrong in what I did, but wrong in how I saw the world. I thought I was just doing my job, enforcing rules, keeping things orderly. But I realize now that I was enforcing my own biases, and I hurt people because of it." Amara listened, without interrupting. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Lena continued, "and I'm not asking for my job back. I wanted you to know that I'm sorry, truly sorry, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be better." Amara studied her for a long moment. "Do you understand why I fired you?" Lena nodded. "Yes, because I abused the power I had, and because if you hadn't stopped me, I would have kept doing it." "That's right," Amara said softly. "Power without accountability is just tyranny in a uniform." Lena's eyes filled with tears. "I understand now. Thank you for teaching me that, even though it cost me everything." Amara stood and walked around her desk. She extended her hand. "It didn't cost you everything, Miss Ford. You still have your integrity if you choose to reclaim it." Lena stood and shook her hand, her grip firm despite the tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Dr. Holland." As Lena left, Amara returned to her window, looking out over the city. The fight wasn't over. It never would be. But moments like this, moments of genuine accountability and growth, made it worth continuing. Part 8: The Standard. 6 months later, the changes were undeniable. Customer satisfaction ratings for all three airlines under Holt Aviation Group had soared to record highs. Complaints of discrimination had dropped by 78%. Employee morale had improved, and new training programs were being adopted by airlines across the country. Amara stood on a stage at an industry conference, addressing a room full of airline executives, flight attendants, and customer service professionals. The banner behind her read, "Respect in the Skis, Building a Culture of Dignity." 6 months ago, she began, I did something that made headlines. I fired a crew mid-flight for discriminating against a passenger. That passenger happened to be me. And while the story spread quickly, what matters more than the headlines is what came after. She clicked to the next slide, showing graphs of improved customer feedback and reduced complaints. This isn't about one flight. It's about building systems that don't rely on who's watching. It's about creating a culture where respect is automatic, not aspirational. The audience listened intently. We implemented mandatory bias training for every employee. We created transparent reporting systems. We empowered passengers to speak up and ensured they'd be heard. But most importantly, we made it clear that there would be consequences for those who failed to meet the standard. She paused, letting the words land. Some people said I was too harsh, that I should have given second chances. But here's what I learned. Dignity doesn't wait for second chances. Respect isn't something you earn back after you've taken it away. It's something you give freely, every single time, to every single person. The room erupted in applause. After the conference, Amara was approached by a young black woman, a flight attendant from another airline. Dr. Holland, she said, her voice trembling slightly, I just wanted to thank you. I've been a flight attendant for 4 years and I've seen how passengers who look like me get treated differently. But since your story came out, things have changed. People are more careful. They think twice. And I feel safer doing my job. Amara hugged her. That's why it mattered, not for me, for you. That night, Amara returned home to her modest apartment. It was late, and the city was quiet. She made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, her grandmother's photograph beside her. We did it, Grandma Rose, she whispered. We made them see. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her assistant. Dr. Holland, the New York Times wants to feature you in their Leaders Who Changed the Game series. Interested? Amara smiled faintly and typed back, only if we can focus on the work, not the headlines. She set her phone down and looked out at the city lights. The fight for respect, for dignity, for justice, it was never over. There would always be more work to do, more systems to fix, more people to hold accountable. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. She had stood up when it mattered. She had refused to be silent. And in doing so, she had changed not just an airline, but a culture. Respect wasn't a service, it was the standard. And Amara Holland had made sure the world knew it. Epilogue. A year later, Lena Ford enrolled in a community college to study social work. She volunteered at a nonprofit that helped formerly incarcerated individuals re-enter the workforce. She never flew again professionally, but she carried the lesson of that flight with her every single day. Captain Reynolds took early retirement and began teaching aviation courses, with a new focus on leadership and ethical decision-making. The flight attendant who had smiled at Amara that morning was promoted to lead trainer, helping to design the new respect and dignity curriculum. And Amara, she continued to fly her own planes, sometimes announced, sometimes not, because the work of holding people accountable never stopped. But now, every time she boarded a flight, she noticed something different. Crew members smiled more genuinely. Passengers were treated with care. And when someone did slip, there was always another voice, a colleague, a supervisor, a passenger, ready to speak up. The standard had been set, and it was holding. Because the woman they denied a seat didn't just reclaim it. She reclaimed the skis themselves. The end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Unbroken Gray Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.